So thanks again for showing up to our MountainTrue University on managing non-native invasive plants. My name is Susan Bean, and I am the Community Engagement Director here at MountainTrue. For those of you who may not be familiar with MountainTrue, we are an environmental advocacy nonprofit serving Western North Carolina and a little bit of North Georgia as well. We focus on resilient forests and clean waters and healthy communities. And advocate for good policy to protect all of those things and other issues that come up related to the natural world that we are so lucky to enjoy in this part of the world. This is a Zoom webinar that you have joined, so we cannot see or hear you. But we invite you to enter questions into the Q&A feature down at the bottom of your screen. If you sort of hover your mouse down to the bottom, you should see some little bubbles that say Q&A under them. And you are more than welcome to type questions into that feature anytime throughout the presentation. We will mostly address those questions at the end, but if you need Bob or Tony to back up a slide, or you didn't hear something they said, feel free to type it in there and I will interrupt them as needed. So feel free to use that throughout. We are recording this presentation and we'll post it to our YouTube and Facebook page and website and all of that. And we will share that link to you after this webinar is concluded, along with a PDF of the slides. So I know some of this gets a little technical. And if you're worried about trying to take notes real fast, fear not, we will send you that information afterwards. And we'll send that to everyone who registered, whether you have arrived on time or not. So I think that is all of my sort of admin logistics. And with that, I will turn it over to our non-native invasive plant and ecology experts, Bob Gale, our ecologist and public lands director for MountainTrue, and Tony Ward, our Western region program coordinator, if I got that right.
Right.
Great. Take it away, team.
Thank you, Susan. Appreciate it, and appreciate everybody that's viewing today. I'm Bob Gale, the Ecologist and Public Lands Director at MountainTrue, and I'm happy to say that it's been such a great place to work. This is my 23rd year here. I've spent 20 years working on non-native invasive plants, having once been in the landscaping industry and having once planted thousands of non-natives before anybody knew how bad they were. So I got my degree in geology and biology and ecology at the University of South Carolina. With that, I'll turn it over to Tony for introducing.
Yeah, welcome y'all, and thank you for joining us. My name's Tony Ward, and I'm the Western Region Programs Coordinator for MountainTrue. We're based in Murphy. And my background is forestry, but the ecology and the natural world has always been very interesting to me. So I feel very blessed to be involved with MountainTrue and the work that we're doing. I've got about 13 years of experience doing non-native invasive plant work, and we've done very numerous volunteer work days with lots and lots of volunteers and been very successful getting invasive plants under control on a lot of our stream restoration project buffers. So I think this information will be great for everyone that's interested in getting some of these plants under control.
Well, before we start the slideshow, I just want to give a little bit of a background, Tony and I would. Most people are now aware of invasive plants, and many people have been trying to eradicate them from their yards and from trails and special habitats with varying amounts of success. MountainTrue has been addressing this issue, like I said, over 20 years, and we've developed a number of methods over the years that have proven very successful. But we've also noticed that many people feel overwhelmed by the invasives that they've tackled. So we'll be showing proper and successful control techniques today. But before we do, here's a brief summary of invasives and what their impacts are on the natural environment. And Tony will go over those.
Are you gonna? I'm sorry, it must not be on the slide.
Oh, I'm sorry, it's not on the slides.
Okay.
We had that in a separate format. I'm sorry, my fault. I will go ahead, since I've got it right here in front of me, and read those.
Yes, you don't mind. Thanks.
Sorry,
Tom.
Tony. So non-native invasive plants, and we just abbreviated NNIP, are this. They're native to other continents and ecosystems, not North America and not the Southern Appalachians. They have no natural controls here, which is why they're a problem. They displace our native species. That's one of the key definitions of non-native invasive plants. And they have longer growing seasons, and they're very persistent. They stay around for many, many, many years. They also grow in a variety of soil conditions, different soils, moisture regimes, pH of the soil, sun and shade, and temperature. These plants have the ability quite often to live in any kind of variety of those conditions. Some are a little more selective. And then they produce tons of flowers, very prolific flower producers, and therefore very prolific seed or fruit producers, whether that's seeds, nuts, flying winged seeds like maples, sort of things. And they're very good at producing all those things. Also, they're really efficient. They have really efficient seed transport strategies. Some use the wind, some use water and flooding to bring in seeds. Some use wildlife, birds and mammals, fur, or just animals eating and then pooping out the seeds. And humans are very good at moving these plants. And we are, after all, part of nature, and these plants have evolved with all of us, and they take advantage of humans. And connected to humans, vehicle tires. Many seeds get transported on car tires or the grills on the fronts of cars. Seeds blow against them and then get transported even many states away. And then finally, they have highly successful germination rates. If you're a gardener and you plant a number of different tomatoes or whatever, you may notice sometimes some of those seeds don't germinate. Well, with the invasive plants, they often are much more highly able to germinate in these conditions. So why should we be concerned? They lower biodiversity. You might replace a system that has 15 or 20 species of plants with 3 or 4 invasives. And they alter the soil chemistry, some of them can do that, and just make it habitable mostly for their own species. Many of them can increase wildfires by, there are certain species that, for one, that grows in the field, and we may talk about it later, that once it catches fire, it burns hot and fast, and if there's a forest adjacent to that, it will do the ladder step up into the canopy and could start forest fires or make it worse. They also harm wildlife habitat by often changing the ecosystem itself, and they can lower wildlife nutrition because these plants do not provide the fruits and nuts and seeds that our native species adapted to over thousands of years. They get some nutrition out of them, but they don't get the proper nutrition, so that can lower their immune systems and make them more susceptible to diseases. And a few actually, invasive plants have caused direct death of wildlife just from the wildlife eating them. Finally, they cost us hundreds and hundreds of $billions annually, everywhere from agriculture to public lands management to your own backyard. And they cause us to spend a lot of money on them, and they cause us to use more herbicides than we would have needed to use. So lots of problems with that. Can we get rid of them? What do you say, Tony?
Yes, we can get rid of them. It takes a lot of patience and determination, and focused in some of the more valuable natural areas that include rare habitats, but it's definitely a possibility to do that. I think we've shown that with our work, for sure. And
one good way to do that, even in your own backyard, we know that invasives are everywhere, so to speak, but actually we don't know where they are until we really take a good inventory. And even in your own backyard, you may want to walk around and really look thoroughly. And then based on the information you get from that, for instance, are they just showing up here, but they're really established over there? You can develop your own management plan, or big landowners can develop a major management plan of how you're going to go after them. Do you go after the established area first, or go after the few colonizers first, get rid of them? There's different reasons why you want to do different methods. So an inventory of your situation is very helpful and for developing a management plan. So I think we'll go ahead and begin the slideshow, and Tony will start this out. And thank you all. Here we go.
So as we've talked about, invasive plants can definitely be a real problem. In this photo, you're looking at English ivy in a tree that will cause wind throw, lots of extra weight, the sunlight taken away from the tree, the branches of the tree, and eventually the death of the tree, which leads to all the other detriments that Bob just talked about. Fortunately, there are ways to get them under control, and we just keep on saying, you have to be patient and persistent. That's important, but it is very possible to do that. So there are several different methods that you can use, but they all fall into basically 3 different categories. The manual and mechanical is just basically the physical removal of the plant, all the root system and everything. And that is the most environmentally friendly way to do it. It's also the hardest in some cases to accomplish, because a lot of these plants, the root systems will resprout. There's lots of seed banks, seeds in the soil. So it is more labor intensive in a more difficult way to do it. In some cases, when the infestation is bad enough, you need to take chemical control and use herbicides to help you get these invasive plants under control. And in a lot of cases, these first 2 methods are the ones that we use working together in order to accomplish control. Also, there's biological methods. You see the photo of the goats here munching on the kudzu. That's one of the examples of a biological control. Grazing, insects. There's lots of different things that you can use to potentially control the invasive plant, a target species. You have to be careful with some biological controls, because goats, for example, they won't stop at the kudzu, they'll eat everything. So it's hard to be selective, but definitely in some of the situations, it's a huge help.
Sorry.
So one of the best and most effective treatments, as I said, is the mechanical manual removal. It's useful in certain conditions where the soil is moist and it's possible to just physically rip out and pull out the above ground portion of the plant and the root system. It's good for small patches of infestation, and plants like Chinese privet, multiflora rose, a lot of the invasive grass species, and a lot of the other shrubs as well. Always best after a soaking rain, because wet soil, you can remove more of the root system when you're pulling these plants out. It requires a lot more manual work and a lot of patience. The drawback, one of the drawbacks to this technique is if you have very large specimens like Chinese privet, multiflora rose, it's almost really impossible without heavy machinery and a lot of soil disturbance to physically remove the entire plant. but in smaller infestations and in areas where it's possible with the soil conditions, it is the most environmentally friendly way to just physically remove the entire plant, root system and all. So here are some of the tools of the trade. In this photo, you see loppers, you see a shovel and a mattock. Those are tools that are useful for physical removal, especially the mattock and the shovel for digging out root systems, some of the safety equipment, and then some of the other techniques that we're going to look at. There's some of the tools here: a backpack sprayer, a spill kit, water bottles, a dauber bottle, which we'll describe, hand snips, gloves, all the safety equipment that's necessary to follow the label on the chemical description. So sprayers, shovels, backpack sprayers, and even sometimes a small chainsaw. There are some situations where it's an older infestation and it's a lot of woody vegetation that needs to go. We use the folding saws with volunteers, but sometimes a small chainsaw can prove to be pretty useful. So it is one of the simplest home methods, and you know, just physically removing. A lot of people, if they have plants like Oriental bittersweet or English ivy, like in these photos, just severing the portion of the vine that's going up into the trees will kill everything that's above. In most cases, there are rare cases where it doesn't, but in most cases, it will kill the entire portion of the plant that's up in the tree, and then you just have to remove the root system. It's important to be careful when you're pulling vines out of trees, because that can be a safety hazard for things falling down and hitting you in the head. You have to be really careful with that. The other thing to remember with physical mechanical removal is you need to be very conscious of the seeds that might be present on the plants and the root systems that might be able to contact soil, because some of these plant species have the ability to resprout from a root system from a plant that's completely been removed. If you pile it up on the ground, some plants like Chinese privet can actually take root and start growing from that removed plant that's lying on the ground. So if you're unsure about that, or whether the plant has seeds on it, it's best to bag it up and completely remove the entire plant from the area.
So when is it time to use herbicides? Well, if you have a monoculture, that is, the whole area is just one solid invasive plant species covering everything with virtually no other plants or native plants or ornamentals popping through, it is very helpful. In some cases, they can be pulled, like with garlic mustard, which is on the lower left of the screen. You can actually get groups of people pulling it, and it pulls very easily, but it takes a lot of effort, and especially if you have a large area of land, it's just too much to treat manually. And also, if you have limited physical ability or time, you're just not able to do that kind of work yourself, and you can't seem to find people who can. At that point, herbicides can be very useful, and they do have the ability to go down into the root system and kill the roots, which is also very helpful. A word about herbicides, because people usually get some people get alarmed about the thought of that and chemicals. And as one who grew up in the Rachel Carson era, I grew up anti-chemical on everything all my life until I came up to invasives. The fact is, we use very little herbicide in controlling invasives compared to the pretty much horrendous use of herbicides used in agriculture and for foods we eat, which troubles me personally. But for herbicides, we're much more selective. And if done environmentally friendly herbicides are used and they're done correctly, you can not cause any harm to the ecology. Herbicides come with active ingredients. That's the important thing in them, but they have their brand names. So you just need to understand there's a difference between those two names, and we'll use both of them today. There's also herbicides that are non-selective, that is, anything they touch, they'll kill, and those that are selective, which focus on certain plants or groups of plants. There are a couple of non-selective active ingredients that we use a lot for, and they're good for almost any species in almost any condition. And then there are a couple of others that we just kind of use occasionally that are selective or actually better for a particular type of plant. Kudzu is one that we use, a selective one, and we'll talk more about that. My menu is hiding the top of the slide here. That's technique number 2, right?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, that's you, right? No, it's foliar spray. Sorry.
Yeah.
So foliar spray is effective on most invasive plant species, and it does kill the above and below ground portions of the plant in most of the cases. The good thing about that is that, you know, if it is a monoculture, you're just affecting that species. And quite often with a monoculture, you might only need to spray it one time on the environment and never again. You just go back. If there's some small sprouts here and there, you can go either and just give a tiny little squirt to that one plant, or sometimes, like with English ivy, you can actually pull it up or dig it up. Also, there's a lot less physical effort required, as we mentioned, rather than digging and pulling. They may not be selective, or they may harm native or desired ornamental plants. So there's that downside to them. You need to be careful. And they're being a chemical, they're the least environmentally friendly technique. Although I will say that sometimes backhoes and front end loaders digging up the entire area is pretty, and cutting trees down is very environmentally unfriendly also. So you just need to balance these things. And I do want to emphasize, and meant to at the beginning, we always recommend for people, especially homeowners, to start with manual and mechanical methods. And if it's in your, I'm sorry, I've got somebody at my door. That was what that noise was. If you're trying to control these plants in your yard, it's always best, and you can be there all the time and go out repeatedly. You can dig these things up and pull them up in many and most cases by that alone. But when it's too much, then that's when herbicides are very helpful. Slide's not changing on me here for some reason. There we go. So I want to talk about some of these compounds. The first one is glyphosate. It's the active ingredient in Roundup, but also in other brands, because the patent expired on this. So anybody can make glyphosate now, not just the giant corporations that invented it. It's a non-selective herbicide. It does kill all plants, so you need to be careful how you apply it. It's really effective on grasses and herbs, less so on woody stem plants. The plant you're seeing on the right here is Chinese silvergrass. It's a huge problem in Western North Carolina, in places like Madison County. And that's one of those plants that can take over an entire field. And when it dries out in the fall, it catches fire. That's one of those that could start a forest fire on adjacent property. The good thing is one foliar spray application can knock the entire plant out. And there might be one or two single stems the next season that pop up, but you can dig them or just hit them with a tiny bit of spray and you're done. You're not putting anything out in the environment. So that's the benefit of this particular compound, and whatever brand you choose to get. You always want to look at the label, and we're going to talk about that for the active ingredient. And there are aquatic formulations of this, because they're safe near water, and there are aquatic invasives that we haven't dealt with those in the water, but there are actually herbicides that are used in the water that break down in water. They're very quick and safe and harmless to aquatic life. Again, we haven't gotten into that, but we do a lot of terrestrial treatment. Whoops, I think I skipped one. No, I didn't. Clopyralid is another one, the active ingredient in the Transline brand. And that's the one that's specific to legumes, members of the bean family. And that's perfect for kudzu. And you can spray kudzu because it grows around other plants, broadleaf plants. You can spray it without harming the adjacent broadleaf plants. That's more expensive, but it's worth it to, to save the non-target vegetation and to get rid of the one you're after, which is the always feared kudzu plant. I'm jumping back to the slides just to show that for foliar spray, Tony went over this briefly, but here, you have a backpack sprayer. You also have rubber gloves, which we use in all of our treatments. We always keep a supply of water on hand for washing your hands and soap, and also in any outdoor activity, a first aid kit. The personal protection equipment, as I said, rubber gloves, goggles, protective eyewear, that is, long sleeves and long pants, and closed-toed shoes. And that square container over to your right is actually a spill cleanup kit. In case you ever spilled a lot of herbicide, this is like a boom that they use even on water for oil spills. It's a boom that goes around the area you spilled, and it's very absorptive and would absorb anything spilled. With that, we'll talk about mixing on best management practices a little bit later. Okay, back to you, Tony.
All right. So one of the other techniques that we use a lot, a vast majority of the time, I would say, is called a cut stump treatment. And this is used for woody stemmed invasives like Chinese privet, multiflora rose, also vines that are problems like Oriental bittersweet, Japanese honeysuckle if the stem is large enough, and lots of, it's universally very useful with a non-selective herbicide. So essentially what you do is you sever the stem of the plant, and you want to cut that stem as close to the ground and the root crown of the plant, where the roots come off of the stump, as possible, because that gives you the ability to apply the concentrated herbicide to the wound, to the cut portion of the plant. And what that does is it pulls that herbicide down into the root system, and it kills the root system. There's lots of advantages to this technique. Like I said, we use a non-selective chemical, and this could get a little confusing because it's a non-selective chemical that we use, but it's a very selective technique because you're only applying herbicide to the plants that you're targeting. So in areas where you have understory infestations of Chinese privet or whatever shrub you're doing battle against, you cut only the plants you want to control, and you apply this concentrated herbicide to this cut surface. And that gives you the ability to target only the invasive plants without harming the desired native plants that are adjacent or in the area. Again, with this technique, it's important that you're very conscious of the above ground portion of the plant. Does it have seeds? Does it have the ability to re-sprout roots and grow into the ground? Those are all things that you have to be aware of. And this can be used in combination with doing other techniques like using cut stump to remove the larger specimens of the target species that you're after, and then using a physical mechanical removal to remove the smaller specimens.
And I'll add that you'll note here on this tree stump, the only portion of the plant that was painted with the herbicide is right around the edge, because that's the only live green portion just under the bark of a tree that actually does the growth. The inner part is dead. It's filled with water, but it's not alive. And the outer bark is not alive. So you can save herbicide by simply applying it where it's needed on a tree stump.
Great point. So it is one of the most environmentally friendly herbicide treatments because you're using a much smaller amount of herbicide than with, say, a foliar treatment where you're broadcasting a spray over the foliage of the plant, and you're needing to cover the entire plant with the chemical in order to control the plant. In this case, you're only applying it to the cut surface. And it is very good to preserve the native plants. It's a lot less manual work. When you have large specimens, it's really hard to remove that entire root system without disturbing the area, the soil and things, which are also not environmentally friendly, as Bob pointed out. So you get more complete control with the first treatment when you use this in combination. And it may require retreatment. It depends on it depends on the time of year that you're using these treatments. It's important that you only do cut stump, I believe it is above 40 degrees, because if the temperature, the air temperature or the soil temperature is too low, the stump won't absorb the chemical. So it has to be above 40 degrees. You can't do this when it's wet or rainy, which we'll talk more about applications and weather conditions later. And you have to be able to apply this in the correct manner to the cut surface and as quickly as possible after, within a minute, immediately after you make the cut, if possible, because that is when it has the most, the root system has the most ability to absorb the chemical that you're applying to it. It sometimes will, some plants are more resistant, Chinese privet. I keep going back to that one because that's the one we do the most work with, but it is also one of the ones that can sometimes still resprout even when you do this method correctly. So the chemical that we use very often in our cut stump treatments is called Triclopia. And it's the active ingredient in several different herbicides. The one that we use, the brand name is mostly Garlon. And this chemical kills the plant by stopping the growth and the food transport. And it's the very best herbicide for the woody stem plants. It does have some selectivity in that it does not affect monocots or grassy plant species, and it is only effective against broadleaf plants and very effective against woody stemmed plants. So here again are the tools of the trade, and if you're looking at this photo, you see some of the tools that we would be using with cut stump treatments. You see the loppers, the folding saw, the hand snippers. There's also a dauber bottle there, which is something that we use for cut stumps, and we will explain how that works. It's really an ingenious technique, because essentially Bob discovered that you can take a shoe polish bottle, you can refill that with your concentrated herbicide solution, and you have a foam tip on the bottle. It's small, it fits in your pocket, and you can just pull that thing out of your pocket and pop the cap off, and you can just dab the chemical on the outside edge of that cut stump, and you have effectively killed that plant. And you're not having to worry about spillage with spray bottles. You're not having to worry about heavier equipment that you have to carry around. You're using much less chemical than you would use if you were spraying it with a spray bottle. And it's just super effective and a really good way to do cut stump treatment.
And I'll humbly admit that I didn't actually discover it as Tony thought. A horticulturalist named Jane Hargraves many years ago discovered this little dauber bottle idea, and I took it and ran with it from there and have been teaching people about it ever since.
So I'm sure there'll be questions on how to get your hands on those. We can talk about that. So with really, really large, say, trees or very large shrub species, sometimes it's a limiting factor to actually remove the above ground portion of the plant and do cut stump. So there are other very different techniques that are variable, and most of them are all lumped together and referred to as hack and squirt, which is basically just wounding the bark at the base of a larger shrub or a small tree, and then applying the concentrated herbicide to that frill or that cut in the bark. And basically what that does is it makes the plant absorb the chemical much like it would be absorbed if you did a cut stump treatment, but the above ground portion of the plant is still there and still attached. So as Bob pointed out, the inner bark is where the living tissue is on the plant, on the woody plant. So if you're applying the chemical to that living portion and allowing the dead inner portion of the woody plant to hold the plant up, then you're essentially doing two things. You're girdling the plant, which stops the transport system, and then you're applying the chemical to that cut, which will also cause it to affect the root system. It is in areas where you're trying to have a more manicured look, it is not an aesthetically pleasing treatment, because then you have all these dead plants standing and you eventually falling over. But in some places where, say, it's a big tract of land, private, public, it doesn't really matter. If it's an area that you need to cover ground quickly, this is a worthwhile option as a treatment technique. It's not, in our experience, it's not quite as effective as cut stump. So in some cases, retreatments are needed in order to completely control the plant that you're targeting.
Thanks, Tony. With that, I want to just shift over. If you're going to use chemicals, it's important to know a bunch of things about them, a few things at least. First of all, we talk about the label. With every container of any herbicide, and even some things that might be under your sink, there's something called a label. And in most cases, it's not just a label like you think, a stick-on label with one page. It's actually a booklet. And inside that booklet are all kinds of directions, and everything in the booklet is actually federal and state law. So you should follow the label. It's really good to just sit down sometime and read through the entire booklet. You'll learn a whole lot, and you'll learn, gee, I was doing this wrong, or I was making this assumption, and or I was using more herbicide than I needed and wasting money. So there's lots of reasons to read that label. There's some signal words on the label that are key. They may be caution or warning or danger, and that they're listed in terms of increasing toxicity of the chemical. So those are key words that are on the label. The active ingredient we mentioned earlier, and we've been talking about them, those are always listed clearly as active ingredient. It'll say Triclopia or glyphosate or whatever. So that lets you know that you're buying what you want, and that's an important thing if you're trying for different types of plants. Also, it gives the mixing percentages, the proper way to mix for that container. And I specify proper because we have this habit in society of, oh, well, if 1 cup works, 2 cups ought to work twice as well. Well, actually, 2 cups of something might not work as well. It might have actually reached its maximum, optimum toxicity, the way they've measured it. And any more than that is just a waste. And also any more than that is putting more out into the environment, which you don't want to do. So the mixing directions are important. PPE, we've all learned what that means in COVID now. Personal protection equipment. Those of us in invasive plant treatment have known this term for decades, but personal protection equipment we've discussed. See what the label says you need for that particular compound and wear it, and just follow it and you'll be fine. Also, the environmental and wildlife guidelines. It may say things like, do not use within so many feet of water, or this is harmful to this species of insect, but maybe nothing else. But you'll just get some more information on that. So read the label, and we harp on this all the time. I always tell people, yes, it's the law, but there's not a Department of Agriculture guy hiding behind the bushes waiting to come out and arrest you. We can't possibly enforce this. So we enforce it ourselves very strongly, and we teach it to the public very strongly, and we advise you to follow the booklet, the label. And here is the label. Here's what it looks like. So here's what you see on the front, and it's usually got a piece of Scotch tape kind of holding it. And you undo that, and you can open it up and read all these pages. So, and there's the signal word, caution. This is we didn't mention this herbicide, Clearcast. It's a new it's a compound called imazamox, which we found is first of all, it's very wildlife friendly, and it's very effective for Japanese knotweed. We finally have what's a silver bullet for Japanese knotweed, but we won't be talking about that this one because we're still experimenting with it, us and the Forest Service, but it's been very effective. So that's the label.
Sorry to interrupt you for a second here, but just wanted to point out it's almost 12:45, and we do have a number of questions that have come in. So just naming the time, don't know how many more slides you have.
Okay, we're almost done here. Very important, mixing. Mix in a safe area at home where you have water and you can clean up any spill. Don't mix in the field. We don't do that. That way you don't have to worry about spilling out in the environment. Mix over a secondary container. Notice this tray. That way, if you spill anything, you capture it all and you can pour it back in the bottle. And you will spill some, I promise you, no matter how careful you try to be. Don't leave containers open while you're moving from one container to another mixing. If you pour it out of the big container, put the lid right back on it, because while you're doing something else, you're liable to back up and kick over that container and spill a bunch. So use some common sense here. And then have your cleanup equipment nearby, whatever that is, a bag of cat litter, a boom, whatever, so that in case you do have an accident, you can clean it up before it goes anywhere. So follow the label on best management practices for spray. If you're using a surfactant, which makes it absorb better, think about wildlife, because some surfactants can harm amphibians. So there are wildlife friendly surfactants. You need to research that. Don't spray when the temperature is colder, as warmer above than it is below, like when there's a fog, because that can spread out under that temperature and hit tree limbs rather than rising up into the atmosphere and dissipating. Wind forecast, don't spray more when it's over 10 miles an hour forecast. And if there is a slight breeze that comes by, just pause your spray and then resume when the breeze passes. You can feel it coming. And at the water's edge, spray away from the water toward land, and you can get right up to the water's edge safely to do that. You can also adjust your nozzle from fine to mist so it doesn't blow so much. You can spray closer to your target plant, and you can use a spray guard. They sell them, but somebody's made one here out of a milk carton and screwed it on the end of their spray wand. So that way you're only spraying, it's almost like a vacuum cleaner right over the plant you're targeting. There are ways of doing things safely. Again, this is cut stump. This is for Tony. Real quick, Tony.
Yeah, it's again, follow the label. You still need to use your PPE even if you're cut stumps treating, because you're still going to be coming into contact with that chemical. So the label directions for cut stump are the same as it would be if you were using the same chemical as a foliar treatment. As I've said, cut the stumps close to the soil surface and treat as soon as you can after the cut. And then also treat the bottom of the discarded stem for some plants like privet, multiflora rose, and large Japanese honeysuckle, because those, the above ground portion, if you have it piled up, if that cut surface contacts the soil, it can actually replant itself, which is insane, but actually possible. We've seen it happen. And again, as we've said, it's important to be very patient and be very determined. You'll feel like, oh, well, it should die. I did this, A, B, and C. It should be gone. I should have it under control. And then the next growing season, you'll see it coming back. But you'll notice that it gets smaller and smaller. Just keep tabs on it. Check for the resprouts. Look for seedlings, and look around the area that you're treating and trying to control. If there's a seed source coming in from an adjacent land owner's property or adjacent public land, it's possible that that is the reason why you're continuing to see it. So just annually go over the area that you're treating and check for the resprouts or seedlings, whatever it happens to be, and be patient.
Yes, and so doing invasive treatment is like mowing your lawn or pruning your shrubs. It's something you do once a year, but if you do it at the beginning of the year, you don't have to worry about it the rest of the year once you've got it down to that level of control. Finally, best management practices when working on invasive removal. Think of the other dangers. Believe it or not, more danger happens from hand tools, people hitting each other with hand tools or falling on their own hand tools, than has ever happened with any chemical problems. So watch out for that. Overhead vines, like Tony said, could pull down large limbs. So don't just pull on them. Watch out what you're doing there. And there's always, wildlife things in nature, bees, if you're allergic, wasps, possibly snakes. In our mountains, we've got a couple of venomous snakes, which may be there, probably aren't, but you never know when you might run into one. And fire ants have now gotten to our mountains, and they'll be a worse and worse problem through the years. They have a stinging, a venomous sting. So that basically is it. We are ready for your questions. Susan, you can give them to us, and here's our contact information if you need us.
Yeah, we had a couple of questions about Japanese siltgrass. One is whether it is an annual, and then the other one is whether it is too late in the summer to pull, weed eat, or spray herbicide on siltgrass.
Okay, I'll handle that, Tony. Stiltgrass is an annual. It dies back every year, but it produces seeds. It's a very slow growing grass. It takes a long time to produce seeds. They don't appear till late August in the lowest part of the mountains, and even through in September, really. And the best way to treat it is to get you and a couple people or a few people and just pull the entire the entire patch just before it goes to seed, like right now. And it won't have time to resprout new plants that mature and produce seeds before the frost comes along and kills what does pop back up. So that's the best way to handle it. This is the very best time to start pulling it, actually. And when you pull it, bag it and throw it in the dumpster, because this plant has the ability to produce seeds inside the stem that are viable before they even pop out into flowering stems. It's a strange plant. But don't use herbicides, because that's really a waste of money. It's very easy to pull.
All right. And then next we had two different people ask about how to control Japanese knotweed. Okay,
as I said, we've got this new herbicide. In the past, we've used rodeo if it's near water, which is a glyphosate a formulation of aquatic safe. But you slowly wear it down each season with that. But it doesn't go apparently down to the deepest roots, which go down 3.5 or more feet. But this new herbicide is called Clearcast, just like it sounds, Clearcast, by Dow Chemical, I believe, and it's very wildlife friendly. And you can use it up to the water. And we've been experimenting with it for 3 years. The Forest Service has been experimenting with it for 4 years. And we've both found that we're killing it, that we finally think we have the silver bullet for Japanese knotweed. It's very expensive. So the Forest Service has been mixing it with some rodeo, glyphosate, which is a lot cheaper. And they found it to be very effective that way too.
All right. What herbicides are safest for areas with box turtles?
Go ahead, Tony.
I think most of the aquatic rated chemicals that are used, that we use with the different active ingredients that we discussed, the glyphosate, the triclopia, and the clopyralid, would all be pretty safe for box turtles. As Bob mentioned earlier, what you have to be really conscious of, especially when you're doing foliar treatments, is the surfactant. So a lot of these base, on their own, these base active ingredients aren't what are causing the issues for wildlife. It's more the surfactant. And when we say surfactants, we're talking about this additive that you put in a foliar treatment that makes the solution more viscous, that makes it stick to the leaves better, spread out on the surface of the plant better. So just like with the active ingredients, you have to research the active ingredient of the surfactant. But all three of the chemicals that we routinely use are safe as far as I'm aware for box turtles.
Yeah, and we in my experience, we almost never have used a surfactant. We've still been able to control the invasives.
All right. Would you recommend Garland for poison ivy, stump cut, or spray?
All three.
Yeah.
If you've got a big, massive monoculture, it's easier to spray it. If you've just got some single stems and vines, you can cut it and paint it with Garland, Triclopia compound.
Excellent. All right. If a large woody invasive was recently cut within a few weeks, but you have not yet applied an herbicide to the cut stump, is it helpful to reopen the stump with new direct cuts to the stump?
Yes, I would say you would need to cut through the stump again, just below where it was cut the first time, and recreate that cut stump fresh surface, and then immediately apply your concentrated herbicide to that cut as we described. And again, make sure that you're making that cut as low to the ground and close to the root collar as possible, because that allows the plant to absorb the chemical further down into the root system.
We did show some slides that showed cutting the stump and painting it, and unfortunately, those are old slides. We didn't have any newer ones. In the beginning, we did cut them too high from the ground, so you might have seen 6-inch stumps, but we recommend, as close to the ground. Maybe if you can get within an inch of the soil surface, that's great.
All right. And then there were a couple of questions about tree of heaven, how to control it, and the best herbicide treatment.
Go ahead.
Right. Yeah. Cut stump. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Cut stump treatment. If it's a big tree and you have a forest of it, I've seen that like in Chimney Rock Park, they had this. Then there were too many trees. They went around and did hack and squirt and basically killed most everything back. And then they went back and did follow-up treatment. But if you just have one or two, like 15, 20-foot high saplings, and then you have root sprouts around them, it's easy to just go through with a dauber bottle and a handsaw or pruners, large loppers, and cut the stump, and then cut the little stumps and just daub them with the sponge applicator, and you can knock it out really quickly that way. With Triclopia, Garland type thing.
All right. Someone asked about, is there a list of plants that are a problem? And I'm about to drop a link to our do not buy guide into this answer, and I can put it in the chat as well, and I can send it in the email where I will send the link to the recording and the slides, so you guys can all have that. We may also have another page on our website that's a little easier to read, like a sort of a web version of that document. But so yes, to Perry, there is a list of plants, and we will provide it.
And I also have a Word document which shows all of our big problem plants in the mountain areas. And I can send you that, Susan, so you can make that available.
Great. Okay, someone asks if there are any tips for air potato, and then someone else said, what should we use against Chinese yam? I'm throwing those together in case those are the same thing, but they may not be.
They are. Tony, have you worked with
Um,
that?
Yeah, the way that we've treated in the past has been very similar to what we would do for, say, Japanese honeysuckle. The issue with the Chinese yam is it produces these little aerial tubers on the plant. And as we described, as far as seeds being on a plant, as you're removing the hand pulling and mechanically removing the plant, especially from this time of year on through the fall, because those tubers are maturing, you have to be very aware. And as you're removing that plant, watch and make sure those tubers don't fall to the ground, because those will actually sprout and start the infestation all over again. So it's just a combination of a physical removal. If you have a big infestation, treat it like you would a big patch of Japanese honeysuckle and use a foliar treatment. But mostly with these plants, air potato and Chinese yam, you can do the mechanical removal and get it under control. It's better to do it from June, up until mid-July, I'll say, before these tubers start maturing, because that's when it becomes really easy to pull the plant, but then just replant it as you're pulling it, because those tubers fall to the ground and they just it starts growing all over again.
All right, we had a couple questions about the dauber bottle. So one person asked, where do I get one? And then another person asked, how do I make one without a shoe polish bottle?
I want to make sure that you understand that you can't just go out and buy any bottle with a sponge applicator on it. Most of them, if you just go to a retail store and get something like that, the liquid will come flooding out, or you'll have to beat it like mad just to get a couple drops. The interesting thing about the Kiwi liquid shoe polish bottle, and we now found a source of getting those empty, is that they have a built-in needle valve. And when you push it against the stump or twig, it puts out just a measured amount of herbicide, and that's perfect for our uses. They actually copyrighted that whole sponge applicator tip, and you can buy replacements. The name of the company in my mind isn't coming right now, but you notice in that picture of the dauber bottles, we had the Kiwi liquid shoe polish bottle on the left and then a white bottle on the right. The white bottles we're able to buy empty from a distributor down in one of the deep South states, Louisiana, I think. And they originally are made for some sort of deodorant, but they will sell you those empty, but you have to buy a $40 order. So you have to buy other things from them, and they sell everything else in the world, from cosmetics to whatever. So you have to find your way through the catalog to the right page and find this one little thing. I can supply that in the name of the company, Susan, and we could send that to the listeners.
Perfect, that'd be great. Maybe MountainTrue could start selling those instead of t-shirts at events.
Yeah.
All right, the next question is, cutting kudzu at the crown worth the effort?
I think it would be, yes, if you're using a chemical like Triclopia against kudzu, it is effective. And if you have a small infestation and you're planning to just remove the entire above ground portion, pull all the vines out, just be aware that there's probably multiple crowns. There's probably not just one. And as kudzu grows along the ground, it actually takes root and creates new crowns. So because we're typically facing a larger infestation, a larger area that's covered with kudzu, that's why we get the clopir lid out and use the foliar treatment. That, and also because we're trying to preserve the other woody plants that are in the area. So if you have a small infestation, yes, it's worth the effort. If you have a large infestation, I would say no, because you're going to find that there's a lot more than one crown, probably multitudes of crowns in the ground.
Plus the crowns, if they grow decade after decade, like you see on the highways, those crowns get to be huge woody stumps under the ground, basically, like a giant tuber or something. And enough herbicide may not be able to get into that if you're just thinking it's a small sprout coming up, it may not be enough to kill that whole woody structure.
All right, it's 1 o'clock, but we've got a few more questions. So I vote if you guys are available to hang on, we run through the rest of these. And
Sure.
if folks need to drop off, then pop off, and thanks for coming. Okay, are there resources or examples for neighbors to organize ridding the neighborhood of invasives? The main issues are tree of heaven and English ivy killing trees. That's it.
There are examples. I've been running into more and more property homeowners associations who want to get invasives out of their neighborhoods, and they've had meetings and come to a conclusion they need to do something, and somehow they've heard of us. And so I've gone and given them a PowerPoint presentation on how to identify them and how to treat them. Occasionally, we will actually give them a 2-hour workshop and show them how to do it out in the field. Don't know. We can't be overrun by thousands of people wanting this, but we do connect with neighborhood leaders who we're able to give that information to and give them the guidance until they get going on their own. So that's something. Tony, anything to add?
I just think that it's great and encouraging to get groups of people, say in subdivisions or property owner organizations, working together. And I think that we would be happy to be advisors to those people if they have a larger group of property owners working together. As Bob said, we can't go completely into just doing that all the time. But we would encourage people to organize and work together to rid your entire neighborhood of these invasive plants.
And we are a public lands focused organization. So we work with agencies and large tracts and national forests and all, but where there are people living adjacent to that, their invasives may be getting on the public lands, and public lands invasives may be getting on the adjacent. So it makes sense for those to all work together to rid all of their invasives as much as possible.
Okay, and I think you guys already mentioned this, but because someone asked, are goats commonly used to remove invasives in this area? I'm thinking here of English ivy on creek banks.
No, have you heard of them being used on English ivy, Tony? I haven't, but they eat everything just about.
Yeah, I've not heard of them being used specifically for English ivy, and I think that if there's any other vegetation, because English ivy is so coarse and waxy and unpalatable, I would think that the goat would probably go after everything else first before it would eat the English ivy. But it will, I'm sure goats will eat the English ivy. If you put them in an area where that's all they can get to, then I'm sure they would be effective. Be aware that goats will girdle trees also, small trees.
True.
Yeah.
That's true. If they've run out of food everywhere else, they'll start eating the bark on trees.
Yeah.
So there are some things about goats, and they also cost some money to raise, and they get ill just like your dog does. And you know what it costs when you take your dog to a vet for some expensive things. So they do cost money for the people that rent them out, and so therefore they have to charge you money. So it is a cost to think about.
Interestingly, David Best just shared that his son used sheep to remove English ivy in Sandy Springs, Georgia.
Well, that's great news.
And it was effective, he says. So, there you go.
Good.
All right, this question, I'm not sure if has really already been covered sort of throughout, but Chris Berg says, feel free to talk about preferences about herbicides or sources for info on better uses of herbicides adapted to a problem or micro area characteristics.
My first thought would be to point them toward, I should have this reference with me. I think it's Non-Native Invasive Plants of the Southeast by the main lead author is Miller. And that's available online. The Forest Service research arm used to publish it and put them out for free, but the cost of printing costs so much they no longer do, but it is available online. And I have that book, which I can give you that resource too, Susan. We could just send them all these things.
I don't have one in reach.
Oh, good. Oh, you don't have one?
I don't have one in reach, but I also have them. I think it's called Invasive Plants of Southern Forests.
Yes,
something
that's
like
it.
that. Yeah.
That's it. Yeah.
Well done, team. That has concluded all of the questions that were outstanding. But like you guys said, your contact information is available on the slide, and you can, any of y'all still watching, can reach out to Bob or Tony or both with more specific questions. But if there's anything you guys want to say to close us out, feel free.
I'll just say, be persistent, don't give up. And yes, there are always going to be invasive plants out there everywhere, but we can get rid of them where we focus and we want to get rid of them. We've proven, we've actually gotten rid of 85% to 98% of all woody stemmed invasives by doing this. And usually you can get it from a jungle-like look to a controlled area in 3 years. And then you only need to walk through in the spring, pulling up sprouts and not worry about it the rest of the growing season. Just do it again the next spring, like you do when you weed and things around your yard. You can do that if you follow all the procedures and stay with it.
Yep, and I would just encourage everyone to get out there and tackle these invasive plants. And if everybody works together, some of these species we may never completely see the end of, but we can definitely get them under much more control than what they're under at this point in time. And once you get them under control completely, the cost of keeping them that way is much lower than the cost of getting them there. So,
And
or
the
the
effort.
damage that they, or the effort, yeah, and the damage that they cause to the environment.
All right. Thanks, guys. Well, I'm going to end the recording, but thank you all so much for coming. We really appreciate it. And thanks to Bob and
Thanks,
Tony for
everybody.
your wisdom and expertise.